We are going to begin on our Winter Wonderland painting as we generally do in the sky with our large round-headed brush. We use this brush because it doesn't have any sharp edges and thus will create less of a streaky aesthetic. I'm beginning with a lot of titanium white and a little bit of primary blue. I'm also using a little bit of a darker shade, more primary blue around the edges and the corners, and this is going to create a very slight, very subtle vignette, meaning that the middle is going to be brighter and the eye is going to be directed more so towards the middle, towards the center of the painting where we want it. So once I have that done, I'm then taking a very small square-headed brush and I'm using gray with a mixture of blue. Now, there's blue in this gray as well because the sky is going to be reflecting light down onto these mountains. And the sky is blue, so this reflected light is also going to be blue. That's how you ensure that your painting is cohesive and everything matches. Everything should have a little bit of that same color that your sky has, because that's how it naturally happens in real life. So from there, I'm taking a bit of additional extra blue and throwing that in the shadows as well. Here I'm taking the same brush, and I don't mind that it's a little bit dirty because I do want to use the same colors. And I'm taking a brighter gray and applying it to the portions of the mountain that are going to be getting more light. And mountains, you want to ensure that they are three-dimensional, that they have multiple sides, and the easiest way to do that is to pick a dark side and a light side. So here, moving in almost horizontal lines, I'm creating very little paths and areas of light upon our mountains. You can see that there is a dark side, there is a light side, and that they have all of these movements in them. Once I have the mountains themselves completed, I'm taking that same brush that I used in the sky with these same bright colors, and I'm creating a mist and a fog down at the bottom of my mountains. And this is a fantastic transitionary step because now we're going to have a forest, and rather than having to put millions of little trees crawling up these mountains, we have that transition. All of the trees are lost within that mist. And so we don't have to do so many. It's a little bit of a cheat, but I think it really adds to the painting and it's very cohesive with the sky itself. It also adds a little bit more of an interest. So from there, I'm taking a very small square-headed brush and a little bit of sap green with a lot of gray, and I'm implementing a myriad of vertical strokes for trees. I'm making sure that they are not all the same length, and the mist, the fog, is still wet, so it's all blending into that, which is really, really nice. It looks far away, it looks subtle, and it's very grayed down because it's very far in the background. You want to save all of your very dark colors and all of your saturation for the foreground. That's really what's going to add a lot of depth and interest to your painting. So I'm also adding a little bit of additional fog over these trees just to show that it's continuing throughout our painting and to tone it down a little bit just to create a little bit more depth later on. Now from there, I'm taking my medium-sized square-headed brush yet again that I used for my mountains, and I'm creating a bridge. Now this is a mixture of black and gray as well. I'm not using a pure black because again, we're not so close to the foreground, and the additional gray is going to help push it back a little bit depth-wise. So here I'm just very roughly drawing it all in, figuring out where I want it, and just getting a decent initial coating. We're going to go back in and add brick a little bit later once it dries. So with that being said, I'm now going in with that same brush and I'm drawing in some trees. I'm starting with 2 vertical lines, and I'm using sap green like I did before, but this time with a little bit less gray. So as we move forward in the painting, we're progressively using less gray in all of our mixes. Now, when it comes to creating the foliage, as you can see, I'm using the corner of my brush and the sharp edge of it to create all of the details. The square-headed brush is fantastic for that because it can render just so much detail. It can almost be like a pencil itself. I'm ensuring that the foliage is always different, it is ever changing, because that's what it naturally is in nature. It's not man-made, and you rarely ever see two trees that actually look the same. So ensure that when you're creating your trees, make them different heights, give them varying branches and inconsistencies and their own odd little, pieces that make them their own, right? Very much like people in that way. We all have our own little idiosyncrasies and whatnot. So with that being said, the trees aren't finished, but much like the bridge, I have to let it dry completely before I go in and I add more. So I'm going to take this time to work on some snow at the bottom here. And generally when we think of snow, we think of pure white. However, if we were to paint our snow in pure white here, it would look flat and very cartoony. So I'm actually starting off with a fairly dark gray as my base, and then I'll work brighter colors, as you can see, brighter versions of gray on top of it. And they'll mix together and they'll create varying mounds of snow, so it doesn't look like a completely even playing field, right? The ground itself is moving upwards and down, and there's bumps and there are rocks underneath, and just a plethora of different things happening. And this is really going to make your snow so much more interesting. Again, I have to let that dry. A lot of this process involves letting things dry. If you do something initially and you don't love it, don't worry, because generally the first layer isn't intended to make it look perfect. We go back, we add things, we fix things, and generally what we want isn't achievable in a single layer, so don't worry about it. From there, I'm taking the same color that I used in the sky and applying it down in the water. I'm doing this in horizontal strokes, and I'm still using that same square-headed brush because it allows me to work around the edges of my land with very sharp precision, which wouldn't really be achievable with a round-headed brush. So just another little tip. When you need to work with detail, again, the corner of the square-headed brush is fantastic for drawing, and the sharp edge of it is fantastic for creating longer, sharp, consistent edges. So now that my trees have dried, I can go back in with a very small square-headed brush and apply a lot of detail on top of my foliage. So here you can see that I have a lot of the white kind of dipping down and covering the bottom of all of these tree limbs, as you can see, and it's really going to help add a lot of depth, a lot of volume, and of course it reminds us that the snow doesn't just fall on the ground, it falls on everything. So when you paint a winter scene, don't forget to put it on roofs, to put it on trees, to put it on the bridge as well. Most everything should have at least a small layer of snow. We are leaving portions of the tree to show through because that's going to give it dimension, it's going to make it interesting, and of course, not the entire tree is going to be covered in snow. Now that the snow, again, speaking of it, has finished drying, I'm taking more of a lighter version and applying that down there as well. We're just building up our contrasts and ensuring that we have something that's very three-dimensional, that's very physical. So with that being said, I'm just adding more to it. I'm touching it up. I'm moving the snow back into the water. And my camera battery, it messed up there just for a second. We lost just a moment there. But what I'm doing now is creating a tree, a large tree. And it's lost all of its leaves. And so I'm just using a burnt umber, a little bit of black, and a little bit of white. I am building upwards with my tree, but it's important to know that when you want to render a realistic tree, a lot of the limbs and the pieces need to be dragged back downwards at a certain point because they have weight to them. And of course, that's going to create a dip within the branch. So when you're painting trees, don't always just having it build upwards and upwards and upwards. Have some branches that come back down that kind of fall a little bit and dip and then come back up and, make it a real process for them. Another great tip for trees is to make sure that your branches are intersecting, one going on top of another and whatnot. You want to ensure that they get smaller as you get higher, and if you're having issues creating very small portions of the tree, use the corner of a square-headed brush and implement a good amount of water. This will make the pigment very viscous, it'll slide very well, and you'll be able to create very small, intricate strokes. So now that I have the base of that done, I'm going in and I'm working on some additional rocks. I'm not using a pure black. Again, it is just a very, very dark gray, but because we're more in the foreground, we are using a darker gray. Again, the closer you get in the painting, the more saturation you incorporate, and the darker the pigments you can generally incorporate. So these rules work with everything, with the mountains, with the trees, with the rocks, and it's just about making it all cohesive and progress very naturally. So here I'm going back in and I'm applying more snow and highlights to my trees in the background, and of course adding snow to my larger tree here. I had to wait for the branches to dry just a little bit to add that on. But there we are after 15 minutes, and as always, I do cheat. I add a couple extra minutes, but I thought I'd show you what I did this time. So here I'm drawing on a bunch of additional rocks. Now here I'm drawing on some very loose, very rough bricks with just some pure burnt umber in a very small square-headed brush. Then I'm taking a black or something very close to a black and I'm drawing on the underside of my bridge. Then I take a very desaturated green and I just add more foliage in the background. I make it a little bit more interesting. I create a little bit more diversity within all of it. Then, of course, we need snow. And this is created via the same way we create stars. I take a lot of water, I take a lot of white pigment, I pull the bristles back and I fling the paint at the canvas. Then I take a very thick titanium white and I apply it to the foreground. I had a lot of texture to that foreground to increase the depth. Don't do this in the background, just keep it in the foreground and you'll render something wonderful. Finally, I take a darker blue and I line the edges of my land with it, just to show that there's a little bit more depth and create additional contrast. Also, I add a little bit of a detail to the bridge, just something to make it intricate, to make it real, to make it special, and little details like this are really what's going to bring your painting to life. But there we have it, a good 13 or 14 minutes in. I truly hope you've enjoyed. I had a lot of fun with this one. I hope you did too. And if you have any questions, leave them down below. As always, I post every Saturday. I hope to see you next Saturday. Thank you so much for watching, and above all, stay creative.